The night my family gathered for Thanksgiving in Rhode Island, I thought I was finally going to be seen. The dining room glowed with golden light, the turkey steaming at the center of the table. I had barely set my fork down when my mother's voice cut through the laughter. "Ava, why did you only send $50 last month? Your brother Blake has been giving us $4,800 every single month." My chest tightened. $4,800? That was my money, my late nights, my sacrifices. And now, he was their hero. "My name is Ava Reed. I'm 30 years old, a freelance brand designer living in Providence. For over a decade, I worked 2 jobs, pouring every ounce of energy into building a life for myself. And yet, in the shadows of my parents' small bakery in Elm Harbor, I quietly wired away thousands each month to keep them from losing everything. I thought one day they would realize the truth. I thought they would look at me with the same pride they saved for my brother. But that day never came. Growing up, I was always the invisible one. I was the kid who spent hours alone in my bedroom sketching, filling page after page with drawings of forests and stars. Trying to escape the silence that hung in our house, my mom, Susan, would glance at my work, nod politely, and then beam over Blake's latest grade report. Straight A's again. She'd pin it proudly to the fridge, while my drawings stayed buried in my notebook. Dad, Mark, would clap Blake on the shoulder and say, "That's my boy." Meanwhile, I learned to keep my little victories hidden. When I was 10, I stayed up all night painting a poster for the town's autumn fair. My fingers were stained with ink, my heart racing with excitement. I won first place, a blue ribbon that felt like gold in my hands. I carried it home, thinking it would finally make them proud. But that night, my parents were too busy celebrating Blake, who had just sold a stack of baseball cards for $40. Mom was glowing, telling everyone he was destined to be a businessman. My ribbon sat untouched on the kitchen counter until I quietly slid it into my desk drawer. That was the first time I felt the sting of being overshadowed. And it wouldn't be the last. Blake had a way of stealing every spotlight, every compliment, every ounce of affection that should have been shared. He was the chosen one, and I was the background character. So, as I sat at that Thanksgiving table, listening to my own mother credit him with money I had bled for, $4,800 every month from my savings, I felt something inside me begin to break. I opened my mouth, my lips trembling, desperate to finally speak the truth. But before I could, my mom's eyes narrowed. Her fork clinked against the china. "Stop embarrassing yourself, Ava. We all know it was your brother who saved us." Blake didn't even look at me. He just leaned back, lifted his glass higher, and smirked. And in that moment, I realized if he refused to speak, I was about to make a choice that would change everything. If you're watching this right now, tell me what city you're from, and hit subscribe, because you need to hear how I finally stopped paying for people who never believed in me. I wasn't always the woman you see today. Long before I became a designer in Providence, I was just a 10-year-old girl in Elm Harbor, clutching markers and colored pencils like they were my lifeline. I spent weeks working on a poster for the town's autumn festival, swirls of fiery leaves against a navy sky filled with stars. Every detail drawn with shaky but determined hands. The night of the festival, when they called my name as the first place winner, I felt a rush of pride I can hardly describe. That blue ribbon in my palm felt like the world had finally noticed me. I ran home, cheeks flushed, my heart pounding, ready to show my parents what I had achieved. But when I burst into our warm little kitchen, the smell of grilled corn and spiced cider filling the air, I realized quickly where their attention lay. Mom was stringing lights across the porch. Dad was hauling out folding chairs. Music played from an old stereo. They were preparing for a party, Blake's party. He had sold a shoebox of baseball cards at school for $40, and you would have thought he'd launched a multi-million-dollar startup. Mom waved me off with a distracted smile when I held up my ribbon. "That's nice, Ava. Did you see what Blake did?" She pinned his crumpled dollar bills to the refrigerator with a magnet like they were rare treasures. I remember standing there, the ribbon drooping in my hand, as my parents clapped Blake on the back and called him a genius. My heart sank. My fingers tightened on the paper ribbon until it crinkled. Slowly, I slid it into my desk drawer upstairs and closed it, hiding it away with all the other drawings no one had asked to see. That was the night I learned something dangerous. My victories didn't matter, at least, not to them. From then on, I kept my celebrations quiet, tucked away in notebooks and hidden folders. My brother's charm would always shine brighter in their eyes, and I would always be the one in the shadows, silently working harder, hoping maybe one day they'd notice. Years passed, and I kept that promise to myself, to work harder, to prove my worth, even if no one was watching. I thought time would change them. I thought the truth would eventually be obvious. Then one summer, years later, I came home for a family barbecue. The air smelled of smoke and sweet corn again, like it had the night my ribbon went ignored. My cousins lounged on the porch, kids chased each other across the lawn, and Blake stood at the grill, flipping burgers like he was the king of the world. I wandered into the kitchen to grab a soda, and that's when I saw it. Pinned neatly to the refrigerator door was a glossy flyer for a local charity event. The bold, modern logo in the corner stopped me cold. It was mine. I had designed it late at night for a nonprofit client in Providence. Every curve of the letters, every shade of color, I knew it, like my own reflection. But under the logo, printed in clean black type, was a name that wasn't mine, Blake Reed. I felt my throat tighten. My chest buzzed with something sharper than jealousy, sharper than anger. This wasn't just about being ignored anymore. This was theft. As I held that flyer in my hands, staring at my brother's name where mine should have been, one chilling thought settled over me. My own family might be helping him steal more than just my spotlight. When I left Elm Harbor at 18, I thought college would finally free me from the shadow my family cast over my life. I earned a scholarship to Narragansett College, and on the surface, it looked like a fresh start. But scholarships don't cover everything. Rent in Providence ate up almost half of what little I made. Textbooks cost hundreds. Even ramen noodles felt like luxuries some weeks. I found myself working double shifts at a coffee shop, my apron stained with espresso, before racing back to my dorm to design logos and posters for student groups on an old laptop my high school art teacher had loaned me. Every dollar mattered. The irony was hard to ignore. I was learning how to craft brand identities that made other people's businesses shine. But back home, my parents were drowning in debt from their bakery. One night, my mother called me in tears. The landlord had raised the monthly rent to $4,800, and they couldn't keep up. "Blake's trying. He really is," she said, her voice trembling. "But without help, we're going to lose everything your father built." I remember sitting in my dorm, staring at my dwindling savings account. I had been living on instant noodles and thrift store clothes, but still, I had more discipline than Blake ever did. He was always bragging about investments and big deals, yet I knew he was reckless with money. I wanted to tell her that depending on him was like balancing on a rotting beam. It would collapse sooner or later. But the words died in my throat, as they always did. Instead, I made a decision. I logged into my bank app, set up a recurring transfer of $4,800 each month, and routed it into the bakery's joint account. I didn't attach my name. I didn't ask for credit. I just clicked, confirm, and went back to designing, promising myself that my family's livelihood was worth the sacrifice. Every time the payment went through, I felt a flicker of satisfaction mixed with a crushing weight. I couldn't buy new clothes, couldn't afford spring break trips, couldn't even replace my broken headphones. But at least Mom and Dad still had their bakery. By 21, I was exhausted. My days were a blur of design projects, late-night shifts, and endless budgeting. My friends saved up for internships in New York or Boston, but I stayed in Providence, tethered to an invisible obligation. Sometimes I stared at my bank balance and wondered how long I could keep this up. Yet I kept telling myself, this is how they'll finally see me. One night while paying bills, I noticed something strange. The joint account I'd been transferring money into had 2 authorized users. I was one, but the second name made my stomach twist. It wasn't Mom. It wasn't Dad. It was Blake. Somehow, 3 years earlier, my parents had added him to the account, which meant every single transfer I made had been visible to him all along. He had been watching me quietly bleed for them, and instead of saying a word, he let them believe it was his generosity keeping the bakery alive. My fingers froze over the keyboard. My mind ran circles, trying to explain it away. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe they didn't understand the forms. But then, I remembered Blake's smirk at Thanksgiving. The way he raised his glass, like he knew exactly what he was doing. And in that moment, a darker possibility dawned on me. What if he hadn't just taken credit for my money? What if he and my parents had planned it together? By the time I turned 24, my life in Providence had taken on a rhythm that was equal parts exhausting and exhilarating. The scholarship had carried me through college, but what really kept me afloat were the long nights I spent hunched over my laptop, designing logos and branding packages for anyone willing to take a chance on me. A coffee shop here, a local boutique there, even a small brewery that wanted something bold for their new line of craft beers. For the first time in my life, people weren't laughing at my ideas. They were paying for them. Some projects brought in as much as $8,600, numbers that felt almost unreal compared to the way I used to count quarters just to buy art supplies. But even as my career began to shine, I couldn't shake the weight of obligation. Every single month, like clockwork, my phone would buzz with a bank alert. Transfer of $4,800 completed. That was the bakery's rent, tucked safely into the joint account my parents had set up years ago. They still thought it was Blake. They still toasted him at family gatherings, praising his so-called financial genius, while I quietly walked back to my tiny apartment with barely enough for groceries. It was a strange existence, living 2 lives at once. In Providence, clients respected me. They hung my designs in their storefronts, recommended me to friends, even trusted me with entire campaigns. In Elm Harbor, though, I was still the daughter who only sent $50. My parents never asked questions. Blake never confessed, and I stayed silent, thinking maybe the universe was testing me, forcing me to prove that I could carry the weight of 2 lives until one day, surely, they would thank me. Then came the day the shadows grew longer. I had just finished finalizing a branding package when I saw an email from the bakery's landlord. My heart jumped, expecting another notice about the rent being due. But this time, it wasn't just the monthly bill. Attached was a scanned letter dated 9 months earlier. It stated that if the rent wasn't paid in full by the end of each month, the lease would automatically double for the next term. $9,600 a month. I sat, frozen at my desk, staring at the screen. Every month, I had been draining myself, making sure the transfer hit before midnight on the last day. And every time, I had unknowingly saved them from a penalty that would have destroyed them instantly. One missed payment, just 60 seconds late, and the bakery would have collapsed under debt. I thought of all the nights I had left the bar at 2 a.m, stumbled into my apartment smelling like burnt espresso, and opened my laptop to finish freelance projects until dawn. I thought of the friends I had turned down when they invited me on trips, the rent checks I had barely scraped together, the times I pretended I didn't care about a new coat or a warm meal because the bakery needed me more. All those sacrifices, and they still believed Blake was the savior. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight. For the first time, doubt started to whisper louder than my hope. What if they never believed me? What if the truth didn't matter? And what if all I had done was protect the very people who had chosen to forget me? Sometimes I wonder, when love is measured only by the money you give, can it still be called love at all? The next time I drove back to Elm Harbor, I thought I was ready for another night of quiet dismissal. But the landlord's words were still echoing in my mind. He had said something before hanging up. "Funny thing," he chuckled. "Your brother almost missed the deadline last time. I called your father, and he promised you'd fix it. Like always." I froze, gripping the steering wheel tighter, because if my own parents had promised me a way, like a bank account, then maybe this wasn't just about Blake stealing my spotlight. It was about betrayal I hadn't dared to see. And I knew I was about to find out just how deep that betrayal went. By the time I turned 25, I had already trained myself to survive on very little. My fridge was usually stocked with cartons of eggs, bags of rice, and discount vegetables I picked up from the Sunday market. My wardrobe hadn't been updated in years. Friends invited me on weekend trips to Boston or Cape Cod, but I always had to say no. I smiled and blamed work, but the truth was simpler. I couldn't afford to leave town when nearly $5,000 disappeared from my bank account every month to cover my parents' bakery rent. It was supposed to be temporary, just a year, maybe 2, until they caught up. But 3 years had passed, and the transfers had become automatic, a part of my life, like brushing my teeth or paying my own bills. The landlord kept cashing the checks, the bakery kept its doors open, and my parents kept telling anyone who would listen that Blake was their savior. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit. What mattered was that the bakery survived. That was my family's dream, after all, and I couldn't stand the idea of watching it crumble. Still, the doubt gnawed at me. Every time Mom called, she'd gush about Blake. "He sent another $4,800, she'd say, proudly. "He's so responsible, Ava. You should take notes." I would press the phone tighter to my ear, biting down hard on my lip to stop the words from spilling out. I wanted to scream, "It's me. I'm the one saving you." But instead, I swallowed the truth, like bitter medicine, and told her I was happy for him. Jenna, my best friend, was the only person who knew. She had become my confidant after we met at a networking event downtown. She'd seen me cry over my empty bank account, had watched me say no to opportunities, just so I could keep up the payments. One night, after we closed our laptops at her apartment, she looked at me with frustration in her eyes. "Ava, you're killing yourself for them, and they don't even know it's you. Why keep doing this?" I didn't have a good answer. I mumbled something about duty, about wanting them to be proud. She sighed, but she didn't push. She just poured me another glass of wine and sat with me until the silence didn't feel so heavy. Then one night, Jenna showed up at my apartment holding a thick envelope. "I need you to see this," she said, sliding it across my kitchen table. Inside were 26 printed bank statements, each one highlighting the same line: a recurring transfer of $4,800 from my account into the bakeries. Years of sacrifice laid bare in black and white. My heart clenched as I flipped through them, remembering every freelance project, every late-night shift, every missed opportunity. But there was something else inside the envelope: a copy of the electronic authorization form for the bakery's joint account. My name was there, typed neatly, just as I had signed it when I set up the transfers. But below it, another name had been added: Blake Reed. And the digital signature? It wasn't mine. It was my father's handwriting, clumsy on a scanned screen, but unmistakable. I stared at the page, my stomach twisting. This wasn't an accident. My parents had known. They hadn't just believed Blake's lies. They had enabled them. They had signed the form that allowed him to access the money, to watch every dollar I sacrificed. And still, they chose to let him shine while I carried the weight. My hands shook as I clutched the papers, ink smudging my fingers. They knew, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Jenna's eyes filled with anger. They've been letting him rob you, Ava. They chose him over you, even when it meant draining you dry. Her words cut deeper than any of my mother's scolding. Because if she was right, if they had truly been in on it, then my sacrifices weren't just invisible. They were stolen. I looked down at the stack of statements, at the evidence of my own naivety, and I knew I couldn't hide in silence forever. The next family dinner was already on the calendar. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I did know this. For the first time in my life, I was walking into that house, not to be ignored, but to be heard. Christmas in Elm Harbor always smelled like cinnamon and roasted pecans. The snow on the street outside glowed orange under the street lamps, and the house where I grew up looked smaller than I remembered. As I parked in front of it that night, clutching the folder of bank statements on the passenger seat, I told myself I was ready to stop pretending, ready to make them see me, finally. Inside, the dining room was set like a holiday magazine spread. White candles, silverware polished, my mom's cranberry sauce glistening in a crystal bowl. Dad sat at the head of the table, his hands folded like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Blake lounged across from me, scrolling through his phone as though he had more important things to do than celebrate Christmas with his family. For a while, I tried to play along. I complimented the mashed potatoes. I asked my cousins about their classes. But the air was heavy, charged with something unsaid. Finally, my mother's fork clinked against her plate, and she looked straight at me. "Ava," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice the warmth out of the room. "Why haven't you helped us more? Last month, you only sent $50. Your brother has been giving us $4,800 every single month to keep the bakery alive." The chatter stopped. My fork hovered in the air, then landed on the plate with a sound that felt louder than the Christmas carols playing softly in the background. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. I took a breath. "Mom," I said slowly, my throat tight. "That isn't true. I've been the one sending the $4,800 every month. From my savings. From the nights I stayed up designing after closing shifts at the bar. It was me, not Blake." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, silence. Then my mother's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into a hard line. She shook her head. "Stop embarrassing yourself, Ava. We all know it's your brother who saved us." Dad frowned, folding his newspaper and setting it down. "Why would you lie about something like that?" His voice carried the weight of disappointment, the same tone I had heard since childhood whenever I wasn't enough. I turned to Blake, begging him with my eyes. "Tell them," I whispered. "You know it's me. Tell them the truth." He finally looked up, and for a split second, I thought I saw guilt flicker across his face. But then his lips curled into that familiar smirk. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said nothing. It was as if the room shrank around me. My parents stared at me with contempt, convinced I was making up lies to steal my brother's glory. My mother shook her head again, repeating, "You should be ashamed of yourself." I felt the old ache rise up in my chest, the one I'd carried since childhood. But this time, something was different. The ache was no longer quiet. It was roaring. It was telling me that enough was enough. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped against the wooden floor. the sound echoing through the stunned silence. My hands trembled, but my voice came out steady. "I'm done. I will not send another cent." Gasps rippled across the table. My mom's face drained of color. Dad's coffee mug tipped slightly in his hand. Blake finally set down his phone, his smirk fading just a little, and then, like a cruel joke, his screen lit up with a notification. I glanced down and saw a preview of a message. My mother's name at the top, her words glowing back at me. "Don't let her speak. Just take the credit one more time." My heart stopped. I looked from the phone to their faces, realizing the betrayal was deeper than I'd ever imagined. When I stopped sending the money, I thought maybe they would finally notice. Maybe they'd call, maybe they'd ask why. But weeks slid into months, and the silence was louder than any argument we had ever had. My phone stayed dark. No apologies, no confessions, just nothing. I kept working, kept breathing, kept moving, but every night before bed, I would glance at my bank app, half expecting to see that $4,800 transfer go out. For the first time in years, it didn't, and with every blank line in that account, my shoulders felt a little lighter, until the consequences came crashing down. By May, 5 long months later, the news finally reached me through Jenna. She sent a photo to my phone, a grainy shot she'd taken while driving past the bakery. The windows were boarded up, the cheerful striped awning torn and sagging, and a bright sign plastered in the center read, "For lease, $9,600 per month. 3-year contract." My heart twisted as I stared at the picture. The bakery, the place where I learned to braid challah beside my father, where Mom's laughter used to fill the air along with the smell of cinnamon rolls, gone. I drove down to Elm Harbor that weekend. Standing outside, I pressed my hand against the cold glass, but there was nothing left to feel. No ovens humming, no warm bread cooling on racks, no customers lined up for Saturday morning coffee. Just silence and dust. I had spent years fighting to keep this place alive, and in the end, it collapsed the moment I stopped. That should have broken me. Instead, a strange calm began to rise in my chest. Maybe this was what needed to happen all along. But then, Jenna handed me another envelope. She had gone further, digging through her friend's bank system, determined to uncover the whole truth. Inside was the authorization form for the bakery's account, the one that allowed Blake to be listed as a co-owner. It wasn't a clerical mistake. My father had signed it digitally, his unmistakable looping signature right under my own. They had added Blake deliberately. I stared at the paper, my throat dry. All this time, I thought I was saving them in secret, that they were blind to my sacrifices. But no, they weren't blind. They had seen exactly what I was doing, and they chose to let Blake take the credit anyway. They had chosen their pride in him over honesty with me. The betrayal wasn't just from my brother anymore. It was from the people I had been trying to save. For days, I battled with myself. Part of me wanted to march into a lawyer's office with those documents, press charges for fraud, and watch Blake face the legal fallout. I imagined him being called to court, my parents forced to testify under oath, the town finally hearing the truth. Another part of me wanted to walk away forever and never look back. In the end, I chose something in between, something that would spark more debate than I could have anticipated. I didn't go to the police. I didn't push for handcuffs or a courtroom spectacle. Instead, I wrote a letter, printed neatly and signed in ink. Along with the bank records, I included a demand: repay me $124,000, double the money I had poured into them, plus what I had lost in opportunities. And one more condition: they were permanently barred from setting foot in the new space I had quietly secured. Because while the bakery had shut its doors, I had already been working behind the scenes. I had sat down with the landlord weeks earlier explained everything, and signed a 3-year lease in my company's name, Harbor Collective Studio LLC. I didn't open another bakery. I opened a creative space where young artists could display their work, where designers and photographers could collaborate, where every voice mattered. I called it the Art and Bread Collective, honoring the dream I had carried alone while giving it a future they no longer controlled. When we held our first exhibition, the entire street lit up with music, laughter, and the warm glow of art on the walls. I stood in the center, my designs displayed proudly, people clapping for me. Just me. For once, the applause wasn't stolen, but even as I soaked in the moment, my chest tightened. Somewhere across town, in their cramped new apartment, my parents were opening the certified letter. Inside, they would see the truth spelled out in cold numbers and a demand that would force them to confront every choice they had made. And just as I lifted my glass to toast the artists around me, my phone vibrated in my hand. Blake's name flashed across the screen. My heart raced. What could he possibly want now? The call from Blake that night rang in my ears long after the gallery lights dimmed. I let it go to voicemail. For once, I didn't rush to answer him, didn't drop everything to hear his excuses. I stood there in my own space, surrounded by paintings and laughter, and realized that I had stepped into a life that was finally mine. The months that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. The Art and Bread Collective became more than just a studio. It became a sanctuary. Students from Narragansett College brought their canvases and sketches. Older artists who had given up on themselves found a second wind, and even local bakers came to sell pastries in the corner kitchen I had renovated in honor of my parents' dream. The smell of bread still lingered, but this time it didn't remind me of sacrifice. It reminded me of rebirth. My career kept climbing. I was designing campaigns for tech startups, magazine covers, even a line of packaging for a company that paid me $9,000 up front. I finally bought new clothes without guilt. I took a weekend trip with Jenna, our laughter echoing across the Rhode Island coastline. For once, I wasn't calculating what I could cut from my grocery list to make the next rent transfer. I was living, but the silence from my family remained. No apologies, no repayment, just rumors trickling back through town that I had betrayed them, that I had stolen from my own brother. I wanted to be angry, but what I felt most was tired. Tired of carrying a weight that was never mine. Tired of craving approval they would never give. Ethan helped me breathe through those nights when the old ache returned. We would drive out to the coast, him with his camera, me with my sketchbook. He'd point at the waves crashing against the rocks and say, "You see that? No matter how many times they crash, the ocean never apologizes for its power." I'd smile, because maybe that was what I needed to learn. Not to apologize for existing, not to shrink just because someone else wanted to shine brighter. I thought often about the letter I sent, the demand for $124,000, and the ban from my new studio. Some friends told me I was too soft, that I should have dragged them into court and watched the whole town see their lies exposed. Others said I was brave, that forgiveness isn't always about letting someone back in, but about freeing yourself from needing anything from them. And maybe that's the real twist. I didn't destroy them, though part of me wanted to. I didn't humiliate them, though they had humiliated me. My revenge was quieter. I built something beautiful from the ashes of their betrayal, and I left them outside of it. The bakery that consumed my youth is gone, but in its place stands a space filled with light, color, and voices that matter. I no longer need to be the invisible daughter, waiting for someone else to tell me I am enough. I already know I am, because the greatest revenge isn't in watching others fall. It's in refusing to let their blindness define you. It's in choosing peace, building your own future, and still keeping your heart open to love. I may never hear the words I once longed for from my parents or my brother, but I've found something better. The freedom to write my own story, on my own canvas, surrounded by people who truly see me. And I can't help but wonder, if your family chose someone else's lies over your truth, would you burn the bridge completely? Or would you walk away and build something they'll never be part of?